With us today in our top Innovator Series is Scott Marean. Scott is the CTO for Inflection Point Technology Advisory. And in the past, he's been the CTO for FIS and also the VP of Engineering at Org Software. And one thing that's special or unique about his experience is that he's worked for different units for capital markets. So he has the whole range of experience there. Scott, welcome. Thank you for being with us.
Joseph, nice to be here, and thank you for having me on.
Awesome. We'd love to dive a little bit into your leadership experience, what you've learned, what some of the insights are. And I'll just open the question wide for you. Tell me something, what you think has made you successful as a leader. When you reflect on your own journey, what do you think is the magic ingredient, or what is something that is important to you as a leader?
That's a big question. So I think I'm a technology leader, right? I'm a chief technology officer. And so I think people would naturally gravitate towards like your technical knowledge must mean that that makes you a great CTO. I would say it matters, true, like you need to have good technical knowledge, but honestly, your ability to work across the different aspects of a business and to be totally tuned into the business strategy, actually, it has more to do with your success as a leader, not just in technology, but a leader across any function, right? So at like a software vendor like FIS, we had groups that you would typically expect, like product management, development, like sales, consulting, client services, even IT operations. And your ability to work across that team as your team as a leader is maybe even more important than your technical knowledge, if you will, right? And then all of that has to be lined up with the business strategy. So you have to know what's the business trying to accomplish this year, the next 3 years, where should we emphasize the development work so that we can get the best outcome. But again, it's like a broader perspective. It's not just focus on technology.
I love the point about the business strategy, alignment with business strategy. Now, you're a C-suite executive and have a lot of experience in that domain. Tell me where the inflection point is for you. When did the shift occur? At what level or what point of your experience did that shift occur from a focus on technology over to the whole business or the connection to the business strategy?
Well, I mean, kind of funny. Like if I went way back to my very early days, I started out in consulting. I'll get you there. Just hang on a second. So, so, so I started out at Accenture, which is this great big firm as a developer there. And at the time, this is kind of funny because now they're a very technical consulting firm, but at the time you could only be a developer for 4 years, and then you had to become a manager. And I was actually morally opposed to that. I really wanted to be an architect, and they didn't have an architect path. So I left there in great disgust. They've since changed it completely, and they actually changed it right after I left almost. But so then I went to a small startup consulting company where I thought, well, this will be more fun. We're going to work with cutting edge technology, and I can just be a technologist. And the funny thing about working for a small company is anything that you do contributes directly and impacts the company so much, right? So at Accenture, you just feel like I'm one of thousands of people on all these projects. If I didn't show up to work or if I did a great job, either one, like, is it really going to make a difference? And at that small consulting company, what I ended up doing was like you're at a client site working with maybe a team of 2 or 3 people instead of teams of dozens of people, like it was at the big company. And then you're you're doing a good job in that context, then creates more opportunities with that client, right? And so then we would naturally have conversations as we're talking about the project that we're working on about, well, what else is going on in this group? What else can we help you with? And I would just do that naturally as just kind of, talking to people. And then suddenly, I remember having a discussion with the CEO of this little company, and he's like, "You are great at this management stuff." And it's like, "So we're going to make you a manager now." I'm like, "Oh, great. This is not like," but the thing is, I kind of got tricked into it, is that I could now see the strategy of how the business worked so much more clearly because it was at a smaller level, right? And you could see like we taught classes on this technology, and so people would come to our classes, but you only come to a class if you really need to learn it because your company's doing a project, right? So then we realized, well, get the people in the class, treat them really well, help them, show them how brilliant you are as an instructor, and then of course tell them like, here's my card, by the way, for consulting. And so we developed these systems where we could grow the business, and I was having a lot of fun with that. And I think that was really where I made the transition from being totally technical focused to being business strategy focused. And it was almost unintentional, if that makes any sense. So I don't know if that answers your question exactly. If that's what you were looking for, but then I've carried that forward into all my other roles where you're really trying to figure out, like the developers could do anything, right? Like today with technology, I always tell people we can develop anything at all, right? Like there's really nothing that's impossible anymore. And so, well, what do you want to do? And why should we do it? And what's going to be the biggest business benefit? Because ultimately it's a judgment call, right? It's not I wonder if we can. Like, oh, we definitely can. It's just, should we, right? And what's that going to do for our business?
That's fascinating. So it sounds like for you that shift of focus really started very early on, and it sounds like it
Yeah,
was
yeah,
driven partly by business development, right? By looking at
right.
what do markets need or what does a customer need, and
Yeah,
so that attention comes in there. Um, I, I would imagine your experience as a leader also shows that not everyone who's in technology shares that interest or that
yeah,
focus on the business. Fair to
yeah,
say.
yeah. Oh, yes, definitely.
How do you get someone there? So you're running an organization, you have many technologists working for you. How do you get them to broaden their aperture and look at that as well?
Yeah. Well, I think I kind of try to do it where you give people the opportunity to kind of self-select into leadership based on their natural talent or gifts,
Mm.
right? So one interesting thing I do is I try to do like leadership book clubs, if you will, wherever I'm working, um, just to say like, hey, if you want to show up, we're going to read this book, we're going to discuss the chapters, and it's going to be totally informal. There's no homework.
Mhm.
It's just going to be random questions that I come up with just to try to draw it out of you. But what I like about that kind of context in your work is that you're bringing up examples that everyone understands because they're like, oh yeah, I was there for that. Okay, now I see how we maybe could have done that differently. And I typically try to open it up to all my directs and their directs. So I say like anybody could come. So let's say
Mhm.
that like when I was at FIS, I might have 10 directs. They each have a collection of directs. So you say like, all right, invite goes out to 50 people. Whoever wants to come can come. And so that's like the first level is anyone who's like, well, I'm not going to bother. I really don't want to do that. It's like, well, there you go. That's great. Don't come. And then of the people that do come, it's very quickly obvious like who just gravitates towards these leadership topics, and you can just see it in their eyes when you're talking about it, like
Mm.
who just lights up and is like, this is just solid gold, this is great. And other people are like, they're kind of playing along, but they're not really getting too much out of it. And I just concentrate on the people that are like the ones that are like the most enthusiastic or attentive or just like genuinely interested, right? And it's not that everybody else in the group is not worth my time. It's just that it might be that if you're asking specifically about leadership, it's like, well, these are the people I'm going to build into as leaders,
Mhm.
right? So now I'm going to focus my kind of mentoring time, if you will, on those groups, on those folks that are showing the most interest in that. And I'll still do, you know, architecture discussions with the architects or, quality discussions with folks that are running performance tests, but they might not be leadership focused.
Yeah, got it. So
So
it's not just the development of the leaders. It also has a lot of to do with spotting the right people, who is ready for it, who
exactly.
is all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Looking at your
Yeah.
own journey again and reflecting on your own leadership journey, what was something that was difficult for you to learn as a leader? What was something that was uncomfortable where you felt like, yeah, I know I have to do this, but I don't really like
Yeah.
it and I'd rather avoid it. And you had to really push yourself a little bit and force yourself or nudge yourself to do
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll get a little vulnerable here.
that.
Uh, so what's interesting, I don't know if have you heard of the Clifton Strengths Test?
Mhm.
It kind of identifies all your top strengths. I really am a big believer in that, and kind of even what I just described, that methodology of opening up a book club and inviting anyone to come. as kind of a way for people to identify their own interest in leadership without doing a test, right, if you will. But if when I take the leadership, like those strengths test, like my top 5 are like, I think 3 out of the 5 are in the strategic family, and there's some in the like communication and relationships. And if you look across my top 10, strangely, there's nothing in execution, which is sometimes shocking to people, thinking like, well, how can you be low on execution? Like that's all the development does is execute projects. And it's like, yeah, but and so to me, I can execute projects. And actually, in that early consulting career I was talking about, I actually did get PMP certified, and I can do project management. But what I gravitate towards is, again, like the strategy, the roadmaps. How are we going to grow the company? How are we going to dominate the market? Like, I like to compete and win. So, like, I want to be kind of on the forefront of all that, making sure that we're aligned across all the different groups, kind of get the system working in development, like make sure that I have talented project managers in place and that everything is running smoothly, but then kind of let them do that. And so I think that as a general rule, I need to always watch myself and say, like, okay, I do have to get into the details on the execution side, on the project management side, and not just, leave that to people that have assigned it to, but actually kind of, I think a good motto on that front is, trust but verify, right? So it's like I trust you're doing it well. I'm sure you're doing it well, but I have to verify it. And to verify it, I need to see numbers, and if the numbers are showing me, I don't believe, we're going to go back and get better numbers. But then once we have a system in place like that, then it's like, all right, now it's faster for me to check it, and I can just kind of, again, kind of keep tabs from more of a distance. So if that makes sense.
Yeah, great. So the Strength Finder, great tool, right, to get an idea of where we're good at, and also tempting to look at the gaps like you described there, right? What is not in those strengths, and what do we want to have in those strengths? Great insights.
Exactly.
So let's again take a look at your leadership journey, and this time not just at the past. When you think of your own development, your own growth, and look at the trajectory of that, and now you are where you are right now. What's next for you, Scott? When you think of what is the next version of Scott, and I don't mean this in a positional sense or company sense. I mean this in terms of your own development. Where do you see the next iteration of Scott to be in your journey?
Yeah. Well, so I do think that I have made a transition after coming from FIS, which is a really large company, and then being independent. I've gotten a lot more involved with the local Atlanta community, with what's going on in development around here. And there's all sorts of opportunities to get into networking groups here. And there's a lot of startup and venture capital here, as well as private equity and kind of more mid-tier firms. And what I've come to realize about myself is that in my role at FIS, which again, I was there for 11 years, so that's like the last decade of my life, as a business unit CTO there, I was essentially what's the equivalent of what they call a technology operating partner in private equity, where you are overseeing a portfolio of multiple companies, and each company is, in a private equity sense, each actually is a separate company, and there's a technology leader for each of those companies, and then I'm kind of mentoring them and guiding them, right? And FIS is really like 90% at least a company built on acquisitions in the past. So it's not even an exaggeration to say that our products at FIS were essentially companies, because they were at one point, and now they're just part of a bigger company. So at any rate, once I had come to that realization, then I started talking to people in private equity in the last year or so, and realizing that is really a great fit for me, because I'm used to the idea of working with multiple different, let's call them companies or products, that have different tech stacks, different leaders within that group, different architectures entirely, and trying to get them all to move forward into the future, like into cloud, into AI, into cloud data. And that's what private equity is constantly trying to do, right? They're trying to acquire a company of that size, like the mid-market in PE is typically around 50 million to maybe 700 million in equity, or I'm sorry, in revenue. And And those were the size of the products and companies that we had at FIS inside the walls, right? And so I've really gotten a passion for that. And as I've tried to break into being a technology operating partner at a PE firm, they're like, well, that'd be great. It sounds like you could do it. However, you've never been through taking a smaller mid-market company through that process, like through to an exit. We'd like to see you do that first. And then, showing that you can do it and you understand what's going on there. And then technology operating partner would make more sense. So anyway, that's kind of what I'm going through. But at the same time, I really enjoy the big companies that are operating in that model. So I'm not opposed to doing that next, perhaps. But yeah, that's certainly something that I've come to realize in the last year that I didn't really fully appreciate while I was in the context before.
That is super thoughtful. I mean, that what you just described there in terms of what could be next, that is really thoughtful about your own development and reflecting on that. And
Yeah.
adding from my own experience, not everyone has that level of reflection. So it's
Yeah.
beneficial.
Well, and the other thing that
And I have to include
I think
myself
that,
sometimes there, right?
sure. I think the other thing that would do for me, like, so let's say this next chapter of my career is working with mid-market PE-backed companies. I think that would be that'd be a great kind of last chapter, if you will, before I kind of start to pull back into retirement. And retirement is probably too strong of a word. It would just be less work hours per week. But I could be on boards, or I could just be an advisor at a PE firm for, less hours per week. And it would be a more natural transition to get there if I had already had that experience for the last however many years. So I just see it as a good trajectory to be heading in right now.
Nice. Let me ask you one last question, and then we're going to land the
Sure.
plane. And again, about the leadership journey. Everyone has their own journey, right? And even though it's easy to think, and there are some general truth to it, but everyone has their own journey. And I'm curious to know, again, when you look at what you've learned from what you've done as a leader, what is something that you feel this is the secret ingredient? What is something that you think you see, that you've learned, you got from your progression, where you feel many other people don't have that? For some reason, they haven't seen that yet, or it's something that they still need to experience. So where do you see something that you are seeing now, but a blind spot for many other tech leaders?
I think the way that I think about any situation when I come into it is I was trying to understand the system, if you will. Like, it feels like to me, everything is an ecosystem or an organism, right? So even if you look at things like developing software, it's like, you bring in requirements and you build it and you test it and then you launch it into production. And if you're doing it right, you then you use that as a feedback loop, right? You see, like, how does it run in production? Are the users even using it? Are we getting good feedback from it? And then have that come back into the requirements at the beginning. So it's more of a loop than a straight line to an end, right? But then there's all sorts of other things within that system. That's just perhaps like the pure software development code cycle, but you don't want to just run a cycle. You want the business to grow, right? So then you also have to bring in folks like sales and marketing and how does that work into the system, right? They go out and talk to customers to sell our current product. They get feedback that says, that's great, but it doesn't do this or that, or your competitor does this better. If they just hear those things and then walk away and go try to sell somewhere else and they don't bring that back into the system, then we don't improve, right? But if they do bring it back, then we do improve. And maybe the next time they can go back to that customer a little while later and say, hey, we took your feedback, that made sense to us. Here we go. We're gonna, we're gonna do better. We built that in. And I just almost look at everything that way, right? And how can you do it faster, with higher quality? Like, how can you automate it? Like one of the things we realized very quickly on was, if you have a consulting project to install your big enterprise software and it takes 6 to 12 months, that's 6 to 12 months before you're getting the license revenue in the door. Like, but if you can do that in 1 to 3 months, like, the customer's happier because the project is faster, but they just think of it that way. We think of it like, and we're getting money sooner, and so then that is a virtuous cycle of you can actually start to compress your pipeline, right? And you can bring that in. And it seems like a technical thing to be able to install the software faster and get a customer live sooner, but it's actually a revenue accelerator, right? And so trying to see how all these things relate to each other and to see like, so what's the system in place? Like, what are we not thinking about? What are we thinking about that we're not looking at it as a loop and we're just looking at it as a straight line? You know, it's like everything's a loop.
That's a neat line. Everything is a loop, right? There are feedback loops everywhere going on, and it's rarely as simple as it looks.
Exactly. Yeah.
Scott, I thoroughly enjoyed talking to you about your leadership insights. That was awesome. And in the end, we almost built full circle, right? By looking at the whole business again, looking at the business as a system and making sure all of that is incorporated. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you. And
all right.
Thank you for being with the Tech Executive Club today.
Yeah. Thank you. It was fun.